My name is Maya, I'm 28 years old, and I've learned the hard way that family doesn't always mean love, it just means people who know how to hurt you best. For the past month, my daughter Leela had been talking about her birthday as if it were the biggest event in the world. Every morning she'd wake up and cross off another square on the little calendar she'd made out of notebook paper, a glittery countdown taped beside her bed. 8 more days, Mommy, she'd say, her voice light with that innocent certainty children have, that the people they love will always show up for them. We didn't have much, but I wanted her day to feel magical. I'd saved up, skipping takeout lunches and late-night coffee runs to afford a small celebration, balloons, paper crowns, and a unicorn-shaped piñata she picked out herself. She wanted Grandma and Aunt Sophie to come most of all. They'll love the cupcakes, she told me, her little face glowing. Grandma said she'd bring her camera. The night before the party, we stayed up late baking. Layla stood on a stool beside me, wearing an apron that nearly swallowed her, smearing pink frosting across the tops of vanilla cupcakes. She insisted each one needed rainbow sprinkles, for luck, she said. I let her take charge. She wanted to make the perfect birthday dessert so everyone will be happy. When she went to bed, she was too excited to sleep. I tucked her in, brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, and whispered, "You're going to have the best birthday ever." And for a brief moment, I believed it too. The next morning, the house smelled like frosting and hope. I decorated the living room with streamers, inflated pastel balloons until my lungs burned, and laid out paper plates with tiny golden stars. Layla helped set the table, humming to herself, her curls bouncing as she moved. She wore the lavender dress her grandmother had given her last year, a size too small now, but she refused to take it off. "Grandma will be so proud I still fit," she said. At noon, I checked my phone. No messages yet, but I figured maybe they were running late. I texted Mom, "We're ready. Layla can't wait to see you both." No reply. By 1 o'clock, Layla kept glancing toward the window, pressing her palms to the glass every time a car passed. "That's them," she'd say, only for the sound to fade into another stranger's driveway down the street. At 2, the cake candles melted slightly in the warmth of the room. The frosting began to sag. I tried to distract her, turned on music, suggested we play Pin the Horn on the Unicorn, but she kept looking at the door, hopeful eyes darting toward every sound. At 3, hope started to wilt. She asked if maybe they got lost. I called again, once, twice, 5 times, straight to voicemail. Texted Sophie directly. "Hey, are you guys on the way? Lila's been waiting all day." Nothing. By 4, silence filled the house so thickly it pressed against my chest. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the pink balloons we tied to the chairs. They looked foolish now, like decorations for a celebration that had never existed. Leela poked at her cupcake with a fork, her eyes downcast. "Maybe Grandma got stuck in traffic," she murmured, trying to sound casual. But her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. She was still trying to protect them, to make excuses for the people who didn't deserve them. By evening, she stopped pretending. She climbed onto the couch, pulled her stuffed bear, Mr. Buttons, close to her chest and whispered, "Did they forget me?" That question gutted me. There was no soft answer to give, no gentle lie that could patch the hole in her tiny heart. I sat beside her, brushed her hair back, and said the only truth that came to me. "They didn't forget you, baby. They just forgot what love means." Her eyes filled with quiet tears, the kind that fall slow and heavy. I held her until she drifted to sleep in my arms, her face pressed against my shoulder, a smear of pink frosting still on her cheek. When she finally slept, I sat there for a long time in the dim light of the half-deflated balloons, surrounded by the evidence of a party that never happened, half-eaten cupcakes, unopened juice boxes, the gift bags I'd carefully filled and labeled. Every corner of that room whispered a memory that never came to be. It wasn't the first time my mother had disappointed me, but it was the first time she disappointed my child. And that was a different kind of pain, deeper, sharper, like watching history repeat itself in smaller, more fragile form. Growing up, I'd learned early that my love for her was always conditional. If I paid the bills on time, I was responsible. If I helped Sophie with her school projects, I was such a good sister. But if I needed something, emotional support, affection, even the simple "I'm proud of you," the line went dead. And now, she was doing it to my daughter. As I cleaned the table that night, scraping frosting off the plates, I realized something had shifted inside me. Not a sudden explosion of anger, but a quiet, cold certainty. I would not let them break Lila the way they broke me. I looked at my phone again, one last time before bed. Still no message. No apology. No, we're sorry we missed it. Just silence. And somehow that silence said everything I needed to hear. 3 days after Leila's birthday, the house still smelled faintly of sugar, vanilla, and a stubborn trace of pink frosting that clung to the air no matter how many windows I opened. I was folding laundry at the kitchen table, one hand on a stray napkin, when my phone buzzed across the counter. The sound felt too loud in the quiet room, an intrusion that pulled every small wound open again. The message preview read, "Mom, hey Maya, need $1,850 for Safi's Sweet 16. You can send it to my Zelle." I read it 3 times like a person reading a line of someone else's script, trying to find where the irony sat. $1,850. No hello, no how is Lila. No punctuation that suggested softness, just a figure and a channel, transaction before conversation. The number itself was meaningless on paper until you imagined what it bought. A venue with rented chandeliers, a photographer who capture pose smiles, a cake big enough to make an Instagram caption, corsages, a DJ who could fake the night into something that looked expensive. It was a wish list of status, and it was addressed to me. For years I had been the family's ledger. After Dad left us with the kind of silence that is heavy with unpaid bills, my paycheck became a slow, steady repair. I took extra shifts. I patched holes I couldn't afford with apologies. I paid for Safi's braces when Mom said, "We'll figure it out," and the "we" always meant me. I remember the first time I wrote a check for Mom's rent, the small satisfaction when the number cleared and the shame when her thanks sounded like a line rehearsed for a play. "You always save us," she'd say. "You're the responsible one." It was a title that came with a price: my time, my patience, my quiet surrender. So when that text popped up, something in me closed and opened at once. I felt the old ledger unroll in my head. Missed birthdays I covered with homemade cakes, emergency car repairs I fronted in the middle of the night, school uniforms bought while my own shoes were thin. I thought of Lila's calendar with its glitter countdown, the way she had arranged the cupcakes as if arranging evidence of love. I saw all of that stacked against a single line of digits. My first reaction was a laugh that tasted like metal. My second reaction was practicality. Why that precise number? $1,850 isn't a round, tidy figure. It's a crafted demand, the kind you'd expect from someone who had itemized a dream and then found someone else to fund it. The third was fury, not the hot, impulsive kind that throws things, but the slow, clinical anger that names patterns. They had always been able to rely on me because I never said no. That reliability had become an asset they assumed would never devalue. I was tired of being the bank of last resort. I typed almost automatically, "Sure," 2 letters, a concession dressed up as agreement. Part of me wanted to keep the peace because I could calculate consequences. Another part, small and steady, wanted to show that peace has a cost and I was done paying it in silence. Then I sent $1. Not because it would matter financially. Obviously it wouldn't. $1 is nothing to fix a party, nothing to agenda the evening or to secure a photographer. It was, however, a punctuation mark. I attached one word: congrats. I sat and watched the little blue bubble of the sent message beat against the glass of the screen like a bird against a window. Urgent, trapped, impossible to ignore. When you spend your whole life covering people's needs, the smallest act of refusal becomes an enormous thing. Sending $1 felt like stepping off a long-run treadmill and refusing to start it again. It wasn't a prank. It was a statement carved small so they couldn't pretend they hadn't seen it. I could have typed a tirade, every unpaid favor, every quiet humiliation, but I knew that would be wasted breath. Their responses were never about truth, they were about preservation of an image. Mom's currency had always been appearances. A triumphant Sweet 16 would be a public proof that she had somehow kept things together, that Sophie was the kind of daughter who deserved a debut. Maybe she needed it to convince herself she had not failed when Dad left. People who feel inadequate in the world buy big nights to feel whole in the neighborhood's eyes. I wasn't arguing that that need was small or understandable. I was noting that it wasn't my problem to finance. There was a quiet, immediate relief that came after I hit send. It was almost physical, like loosening a grip you didn't know you'd had tight for years. I looked around the kitchen at the half-empty juice boxes from Lila's celebration and the paper crowns I'd kept because she wanted to wear them to bed. Those objects suddenly felt like the true currency: time spent, cookies baked, the small, unmarketable care that meant something real. My money, my labor, had been used to build a narrative that wasn't mine. I wanted Leela to grow up knowing the difference between what people want you to fund and who will actually show up for her. There was another layer to it too. I wanted my daughter to see a boundary. Teaching a 7-year-old about emotional economics sounds silly. She couldn't understand invoices or Zelle, but she could understand consistency. She could understand that love shows up, and when it doesn't, you protect the heart that's been left open. I wanted to model a refusal that didn't come from pettiness but from dignity. I put my phone face down on the table and went to the sink to wash my hands slowly, deliberately. Water ran over my wrists, and the repetition of the motion gave my mind space to catalog the ways I had enabled silence. I thought of the little ways Mom had manipulated sympathy, an ache here, a sudden expense there, each one arriving just when I had given myself permission to breathe. I thought of Sophie, whose smile could light a room and who had been taught that celebrations were owed, not earned. The kitchen light hummed. In the next room, Leela was playing with Mr. Buttons, arranging invisible tea on an invisible table. She was oblivious to the adult arithmetic happening on my phone, thankfully so. The message sat on my screen, $1 sent, a note left, a silence filled. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steadier, like soil finally tamped down around a small seed. This small rebellion was not theater. It was the beginning of a different ledger, one that kept track of kindness given freely and boundaries set clearly. I folded the last towel, set it on the stack, and for the first time in a long while I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, that ledger would balance in a way that finally made room for Leela. That evening, when the call came, I already knew what kind of conversation it would be, not from intuition, but from history. I'd seen that number flash on my screen too many times not to know what waited on the other end. Blame disguised as concern, guilt disguised as love. Still, I answered. Old habits die slowly, especially when they were once built on hope. Her voice came sharp, cutting through the speaker like glass. Are you being funny? She snapped, skipping any greeting. $1? You think this is a joke? I closed my eyes, leaned against the kitchen counter, and let her words hang in the air a moment before answering. No, Mom. I think what's a joke is asking for nearly $2,000 after you couldn't bother to call your granddaughter on her birthday. A pause. Just long enough for me to imagine her face tightening, her jaw setting in that familiar way. Then came the explosion. Oh, so now you're keeping score. You think being a single mom makes you special. The venom in her voice was so practiced it sounded rehearsed. Sophie deserves her day, Maya. She's turning 16. Don't make this about you. I almost laughed. Not out of amusement, but disbelief, how easily she could twist a wound into an accusation. I looked around my kitchen, still littered with the remnants of Lila's party that wasn't. The deflated pink balloons, the half-used roll of unicorn wrapping paper, the untouched plates we'd set out for guests who never came. For a second, I thought about explaining again calmly that this wasn't about jealousy, but about respect. But I stopped myself. I'd given too many explanations over the years, each one an open door for more manipulation. I'm done talking, Mom, I said quietly. You always were ungrateful, she shot back. Everything I did for you. I didn't let her finish. The click of the call ending felt heavier than it should have, like a door locking from the inside. I stood there, phone still in my hand, staring at the blank screen as the kitchen filled with that strange silence that follows a storm. For years, I'd feared that silence. I used to fill it with apologies, compromises, and money. But that night, the quiet felt clean. I didn't owe her noise anymore. I didn't sleep much after that. My mind kept replaying fragments of the call, old conversations tangled with new ones, old guilt colliding with new boundaries. Around midnight, I went to Leela's room and watched her sleep, her face relaxed in a way I hadn't felt in years. I realized then what I wanted most, for her to grow up without inheriting this cycle of emotional debt, to know that love isn't something you have to pay for. The next morning, I woke early, showered, and drove to the hardware store. The aisles smelled like metal and dust, comfortingly practical scents, the kind that belonged to people who fix things. The man behind the counter asked what I needed. I told him, a new lock set. Nothing fancy, just something strong, reliable. I bought it, drove home, and laid everything out on the kitchen table. The act itself was simple. Unscrew, remove, replace, but it felt symbolic, almost sacred. Each turn of the screwdriver was a quiet declaration. This is my space. My door, my boundary. When the new lock clicked into place, it wasn't just metal shifting. It was something inside me realigning. For the first time, my home felt like mine, not just a shelter I funded but a space I owned emotionally. There was no trace of guilt in that moment, no lingering shame, just peace, a rare, sturdy kind of peace that doesn't make noise. By afternoon, I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching Leila chase bubbles in the yard. The light hit her hair, making it shimmer like spun honey, and I thought, this is enough. We don't need grand parties or public approval. We need safety, truth, and each other. But peace is fragile, especially when you've spent your life surrounded by people who feed on chaos. The knock came late, loud, deliberate, too firm to be casual. The kind of knock that vibrates through wood and bone. I set my cup down and froze, a strange unease creeping up my spine. For a moment, I thought maybe Mom had driven over to deliver her anger in person. Or maybe Sophie, dramatic as ever, had come to plead her case. But when I opened the door, the air shifted. 2 police officers stood on the porch. Their uniforms were pressed, their faces unreadable. One was older, mid-40s, eyes sharp and assessing. The other, younger, holding a clipboard like it was a shield. Behind them, the street was quiet, too quiet. Even the wind had paused to listen. "Are you Maya Dawson?" the older one asked. I nodded slowly, my pulse quickening, though I didn't yet know why. The world seemed to tilt, the ordinary edges of my morning, tea, sunshine, quiet, sliding out of place. Lila's laughter in the yard fell silent, as if she too sensed the shift. I straightened, forcing calm into my voice. "Yes, what's this about?" The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, and in that small hesitation, something inside me clenched. The kind of pause that means news, never good, never routine. Standing there with the smell of fresh metal from the new lock still lingering in the doorway, I realized something. Peace always costs something, and I was about to find out what my peace had just cost me. When the officer said the words, "We received a report that you've locked your mother out of her residence," the sentence landed like a door slammed in my chest. For a second, the world narrowed to the 2 of them on my porch and the steady, absurd ticking of the hallway clock. My skin prickled. I tasted copper on the back of my tongue. It was a strange humiliation to have your private life translated into someone else's story and delivered to men in uniforms who had the power to make your life briefly inconvenient or worse. "This is my house," I said, because the plain fact of it needed to be said aloud. It felt like a defense, the simplest legalist truth I could pull out in a moment built on lies. "It's under my name. I bought it 2 years ago." The older officer, Reyes, he introduced himself while flipping the report closed and then open again, folded his hands and glanced at the younger one like he was checking tone. "She said she was living here temporarily and that you're withholding her belongings," he read, his voice neutral but soft at the edges where protocol met people's messy lives. There was no judgment in his face, only the quiet business of paperwork. To them it was a welfare call with a title. To me it was a raw, personal betrayal. As I led them through the house, my chest felt strangely hollow. I moved almost on autopilot, picking up the mortgage statement from the small pile on the counter, sliding the official envelope toward the officer, pulling the deed from the folder in the top drawer where I kept tax returns and receipts. The pages had the sharp smell of freshly printed paper and ink, the small, domestic odor of responsibility. I laid them out, bank statements, utility bills, the name printed across the closing documents in block letters, Maya Dawson. My voice shook, not from fear of what the officers might do, but from the weight of watching my life, my work, be questioned by the people I'd sheltered and supported my whole adult life. I thought of all the late nights working an extra shift so the mortgage would clear on time, of the small moral math, pay this or that, hover the oil change, make the rent, and how it always ended with me being right where I began, responsible, invisible in the ledger until my generosity became a service others expected. The younger officer, his name tag read Miller, lifted the deed and squinted at it, his expression drifting between the formalities of duty and the human trace of sympathy. He turned the pages slowly, as if reading someone's life could be done by touch. "Seems clear, ma'am," he said finally, and there was an almost audible relief in his voice that made the blood in my ears loosen. "Sorry for the trouble." Sorry for the trouble. The phrase could have been a balm or a blade. It was neither. It was a professional hinge that closed a door on the immediate crisis. I watched them finish their notes, fold the report into their clipboard, and tidy up the paper trail they'd created on my kitchen table. Outside, the quiet resumed as if nothing had happened. Inside, the space between my ribs was raw. As they left, the older officer paused in the doorway, and this time his gaze met mine with something like caution. "You might want to change your number," he said, and there was a careful gravity in it, as if he wanted me to understand the pattern he'd seen in too many homes. Some people don't know when to stop. He was right. That suggestion was more than a procedural tip. It was an acknowledgement that my boundary, firm, newly installed, and quietly defiant, was a light that would attract those who expected it to be extinguished. It was also an admission, blunt and unwelcome, that law and paperwork could only carry me so far in a family war where stories and sympathies did more damage than any legal claim. When the front door finally closed behind the police car, my phone buzzed. The screen lit with red text, the kind of notifications that used to make my throat soften, but now felt like a drumbeat of obligation. "Mom, you'll regret this. Family helps each other." The words were an old script, weaponized guilt in 3 short lines. "Safi, can't believe you're jealous of me. Grow up." The entitlement in her message was as casual as she'd always been, a reflexive claim on attention and resources that had never been earned. I stood there, papers in a small, scattered stack on the counter, the new lock's faint metallic scent still in the air, and felt the slow churn of anger and an odd, fierce sorrow. It wasn't enough to be right in the eyes of the law when your family could collapse your life with a sentence and a phone call. I had proven, with ink and filing stamps, that the house was mine. That proof didn't change the fact that my mother could pick up a phone and knit a reality that would, in minutes, pull officers to my doorstep. I thought about the things that motivated them: my mother's hunger for validation, Sophie's need to be the center of a narrative, the way our family used spectacle as proof of worth. The party they wanted was less about Sophie than about the image it would create, proof to the neighborhood that they were succeeding where they felt they had failed. For them, my refusal was a threat to a carefully manicured story, so they bent the facts and called the state to step into the role of arbiter. I blocked both numbers that night not because I was cruel, but because I had to erase an open wound before it could be reopened. Blocking felt like administering a small, necessary antiseptic. It was an act with no ceremony, no dramatic phone call, no speech, but it was decisive in a way my previous compromises had never been. The screen went dark after the block, and the silence that followed was not the oppressive quiet that had haunted me in the weeks past. It was a guarded hush, like the moment when you haul a door shut behind you and brace against the handle to make sure it holds. I stayed up later than I should have, watching the small city lights through the kitchen window and listening to Lila breathe in the other room, steady, ignorant, perfect. The house around me hummed with ordinary sounds: the refrigerator's low thrum, the soft click of the thermostat trying to hold the day's heat. Those noises were suddenly sacred, the small signals of a life I had earned, messy and imperfect and entirely ours. Blocking them didn't erase the hurt. It created space to think, to plan, to protect the quiet life I wanted for my daughter. The officers had gone, the paperwork had been signed, and the law had been on my side. But the real work, teaching Lila to recognize love that shows up, and to distinguish it from the spectacle of people who are addicted to attention, would be the long, steady thing I could finally begin. 3 weeks after the officers left and the last angry text disappeared into the black hole of my blocked list, the house felt different, less like a stage and more like a home. The difference wasn't cinematic. It was made of small, practical things that added up until the shape of our life shifted. Mornings started with sunlight landing on Lila's backpack as she swung it over one small shoulder. I watched her practice tying her shoelaces at the kitchen table, tongue poking out in concentration, and marveled at how ordinary and miraculous that small independence felt. Evenings were quieter, no phones ringing with demands, no tense second-guessing before saying yes. We ate dinner together, plates clinking, the simple, steady talk of 2 people who had nothing to prove to anyone else. I'd expected some kind of dramatic relief once I'd set boundaries, some thunderclap of liberation that would make the ache leave immediately. Instead, it unfolded like a slow settling. Bills paid on time because I'd refused the scams of guilt that used to reroute my paycheck. Conversations with Lila where I practiced saying no gently but firmly. A string of early nights where I slept without waking to wonder if someone would call asking for money I didn't have. The thermostat hummed. The kettle steamed. These ordinary noises were not dull. They were evidence that the frantic, performative life I'd been running had been traded for something sustainable. One night I pulled an old shoebox down from the top shelf of my closet, one I'd never bothered to open since the move, and inside, wrapped in a single brittle tissue, was a framed photo of Sophie as a toddler. She was on my lap, frosting smeared like war paint across her cheeks, eyes bright and untroubled. I'd made that cake. I remembered the way she clapped when I'd put the candles in. I remembered her hair sticking up at odd angles from sugar and delight. The memory lodged in me like a grain of sand, sharp, small, impossible to extract without pain. I set the picture on the table and let it look at me. It wasn't a proof of malice. Sophie had always been a child who radiated joy and demanded attention. She deserved birthday cakes and sunlight just like any child. What the photo did was show me my own history of giving until I'd hollowed out the center of myself. I could have smoothed the memory into an apology to myself. You did the right thing, but that would have been half the truth. The real truth, the one that made my throat tighten and finally steady, was this: I had been saving people who did not want to be saved. And in doing so, I'd been teaching my daughter that love came at the price of exhaustion and erasure. Saying it out loud felt ridiculous at first, like a small confession in a large empty room, but the sentence found its weight. I'm done saving people who don't want to be saved. It wasn't a threat or a punishment. It was a contract with myself. No more unpaid emotional labor as currency for attention. No more letting other people's insecurities dictate my family's safety. Saying it aloud dispelled the fog of indecision. It carved a line in the air that separated who I had been from who I would be. The next morning, Layla bounded into the kitchen with a sheet of crayon-scared paper clutched in both hands, breathless like she'd run across the yard just to get there. She thrust the drawing at me, two stick figures under a lopsided rainbow, one slightly bigger with a dot of hair, the other small and triumphant. In blocky letters she'd written, "Just us, and it's enough." My chest folded and then opened. There was no bitterness in the drawing, no echo of the adult complications that had led us here. Only a child's pure, unquantified faith that love can be small and still be everything. I taped that picture to the fridge with a stubborn strip of tape, right next to the grocery list and the laminate library card. It was my new North Star. Every time I reached for the jug of milk or scanned the calendar, the drawing reminded me of the commitment baked into the everyday. Presence, protection, simplicity. Layla wasn't making a statement. She was reminding me of what mattered. Practical things followed the emotional pivot. I reworked the budget with a forward-looking steadiness that felt almost militaristic. Emergency fund contributions, a modest increase in the grocery budget so I didn't scrimp on fresh fruit for Layla, a small line item for savings that felt like planting for a future neither of us could fully predict. I contacted the bank to set up automatic payments so no more of my energy would be spent juggling due dates. I enrolled Layla in a Saturday art class at the community center, a small, reliable joy that belonged to her and only her. I reconnected with people who gave without taking. Mrs. Ellis across the street who'd baked a loaf of bread and left it at our door one afternoon, and Jonah from work who brought a packet of spare crayons because he remembered Layla drawing at his desk and smiled like it mattered. The most transformative shift, though, was internal. There's a particular kind of stubbornness that grows when you stop rescuing people who prefer the role of victim. It's not mean, it's clarifying. My anger softened into strategy. I started to see my mother and sister for what they were: wounded, performative, hungry for a mirror that told them they were succeeding. That didn't excuse their actions, but it allowed me to stop colliding with them, and instead to place my energies elsewhere, into repair, into nourishment, into practicing the kind of consistency that my daughter would remember. At night, I watched Layla fall asleep and counted the small returns on the investment of a boundary. Her chest rose and fell with a steadiness I hadn't seen in weeks. She hummed in her sleep, tuneless, happy, like a tiny engine that had been tuned right. I would lie awake for a little while sometimes and think of the new lock's click, the silence after the block, the way the police officer had suggested I change my number. Those things felt like scaffolding rather than scars. They'd supported a different kind of life into being. People assume triumph is loud. A courtroom victory, a viral post, an apology. My triumph was quieter. It was pancakes on a Sunday morning with syrup the way Layla liked it, a little too sweet, staying up late to fix a torn backpack strap, laughing at a ridiculous joke she told. It was turning down a request for money and feeling no dread, only clarity. It was the picture leaning against the fridge, reminding me that home is what we build, not what others demand we finance. Some nights, when the house breathes and the city sounds hush, I tell myself that walking away from those who drain you is a radical, loud thing after all. Not because it attracts attention, but because it is an act of preservation so unapologetic that it redefines love. Not love as sacrifice until you are empty, but love as enough, steady, nourishing, and true. For Leela and for me, that is everything.